One way that I used, one rebellious way, this is highly rebellious, and I used it and it actually worked for me. I started doing this in my 300 level, and that is when I saw a spike in my grades. When I was in university, there are some rebellious ways I studied, which our lecturers or teachers will not advise us to study like that. But then I studied those ways and was able to get high grades. Now, there are certain things that your lecturer or your teacher will always tell you that you should do in order to get high grades. But I didn't follow those ways. It's these rebellious ways that I followed. They are quick ways and it will save you much time. I'll be stating those rebellious ways and I'll be backing it up by personal story and how I actually applied it to get high grades. The very first way, which is one rebellious way that I used, is that I don't usually study everything, but I study what matters. When I was in 300 level at that point in time, there is one course that I did on public finance, which is CN 309. I think that particular course, the lecturer just comes by giving us a lot of materials. At times, we say we should print out the budgets for a particular year. You bring all sorts of materials for us to read, and you keep telling us that it's going to come out for the exam. But then, at first, I was really confused on whether I should really study it or not. But going through the past question, I realized that most of the questions that was asked in the past questions were application questions, and there was nothing like all those materials that I gave. So I decided not to study everything that I was given. Although the instruction that I gave us was that we should study everything, but I decided not to. I went on to the past question. I sought out content for the past question. And funny enough, most of the questions in the past question, the contents are not in the materials that I gave us. So if I'd listened to what he said, I would end up failing the course because most of the contents were found in other materials. But then I decided to, due to the confusion and because the course didn't really have a direction, so I decided to get other materials in relation to the past question. I provide solutions to them and I read a little bit of the material. And funny enough, when exams came, none of the materials I asked us to study actually came out. None of the content actually came out. So most of it were application questions and the solution to the past questions that I got. So at that point in time, that was how I was able to learn that just study what matters. And the only way you can study what matters is to check past questions. Past question is the only guide for you. And if you check past questions, you know which questions that resurface every year because there are specific questions that resurface every year. So if you check it to actually help you to navigate your way and you won't bother reading so much materials or textbooks that we're given. Don't get me wrong, I do not say you should not read everything, but don't focus on them too much for your exams. Another rebellious way that I studied when I was in school is that I decided to use past questions as my primary textbook. I get my textbook, I read all the recommended textbook, I listen to the lecturer and the teacher. But it got to a point that when I stopped listening to them and I'm doing what I think matters more, I started seeing improvements in my results. In fact, there was one particular course I did in my 400 level on monetary economics. That particular course, we are given notes on linear programming, different textbooks and different materials. In fact, the material was so much. And truth to be told, the past question that I studied few minutes before the exam, the past question came exactly like that for my exam. And I then started asking myself that if I didn't decide to study the past question, that is how I'm going to fail the exam. Because everything that we are given in the class didn't really actually come out. In fact, the linear programming that we are taught, it just gave us specific set of instructions and it didn't actually give us a practice question. But he always say we should read it. But then I went ahead to start getting past questions and solved examples for that particular topic. And I searched online, I decided to find solutions to them. Then I was able to answer them well. So we are not taught in class, so to say, but then I discovered that particular solution. So in essence, if you always listen to what your lecturer or your teacher says, you might not pass the exam. Focus on what matters, which is your past question, and also read a little bit of your notes because it serves as a direction. But go further than that by getting extra material on what you were taught and use your past question as your primary textbook. Another rebellious way that I studied is that I ignore study materials and I build my own. Now, this is what I do most of the time. I started doing it when I was in 200 level because I discovered that those materials that we are given in class does not actually include the most important things. Like I said I use my past question as my primary textbook. Then when I use my past question as my primary textbook and I check questions that were asked in the past question, I discovered that some of the questions are not in my study material. So I went further by getting other materials, then I create my notes myself. So in that case, I have two notes. I have my study material and I have my own notes that I built. So I used to shovel them around and look for gaps in between those notes and similarities. So at that point in time, I'm not focusing too much on the study material. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you should not focus on the study material, but try as much as possible to create your own notes, create your own draft. They call it cheat sheet. When you create your own draft, and that draft will actually contain everything you understand in your own words and your own summary, and some other information that you think, and some additional information based on the past question that you've actually discovered. That is one rebellious way that I studied. So the lecturer or the teacher will always say, get your study material and read them. But then I created my own by looking at all those things. This is the particular strategy that I used and it got me high grades. So start using them. I don't study for long hours. I study in sharp bursts. Now, what do I mean? Now, some lecturers or some people will actually tell you that it is until when you study for long hours that you'll be able to get most of the things, but it's a lie. What matters more while studying is the attention you place on what you are studying. And if you study for long hours and you are not able to pay the right attention to whatever you have studied, you wasted your time. So it is very important that no matter the amount of time that you are using while studying, make it worthwhile by paying full attention to whatever you are studying. So most of the time when I was in school then, I don't go straight 3 hours studying. I study in sharp bursts. I can study for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. In fact, I study in between lectures. So I can leave in the morning by 7 a.m. and study from 7 to 8. Then because 8 o'clock I have a class. So from 8 to 10, I might have a class. My next class can be 11. Then I study for another 1 hour in between classes. That's how I study in between. And if you study early and you keep doing that, it piles up. When your exam comes, you only need to revise. So you should not wait until when you are done with the whole syllabus before you study everything, because it's going to be a lot for you, and that is where most students spend long hours. So I will advise you to study bit by bit and use all the strategies like create your own notes, use your past question as your primary textbook, and if you use all those things, it will actually help you along the way. One last way that I used, one rebellious way, this is highly rebellious, and I used it and it actually worked for me. I started doing this in my 300 level, and that is when I saw a spike in my grades. I don't copy class notes. I ask questions that help me remember. Now, most of the time when I'm in class, I don't copy class notes. I get to the class to get insight. That is insight on where I should pay attention to most, and explanation from the lecturer because it helps. But then the notes that they copy, I don't copy it. I get it later. But then I pay attention to the class and I ask more questions in class, because when I ask questions, I tend to remember the questions I asked, or when I answer question, I tend to remember the questions I answered in class. So it makes me remember them more when I'm in the exam. So when I'm in the exam, most of the time at times I might not really remember what I read, or I will remember what I said, or the questions I asked in class. So that is that. So if you apply all of this while you are in school, it will actually help you, put you on the right path to study rebelliously and get the grades you desire. So you don't have to actually always follow the traditional way. There are other ways you can study which would not actually stress you much, and you get the grades you need. You can also check out this video on other tips you need in order to study for your exam very well and succeed in it. Thank you so much for watching, and see you on the next one.